Hey, Steve here, and you might recall that I said I was going to talk about the mask controversy in the first few videos, so that's what this is about. And what I want to talk about today is the changing recommendations about masks that's happened over time during this pandemic. A lot has been made of this online, and you might recall that initially they said, well, you don't have to wear a mask unless you're with somebody coughing or you're coughing yourself or you're sick. You don't have to wear a mask otherwise. And then down the road they said, well, you really should be wearing a mask whenever you go out in public. And then more recently they've said, well, maybe you should be double masking. So what is that about, and what's with the whole changes and everything? A lot was made of this online, and people said things like public health people are incompetent, or maybe they don't know what they're talking about. And then we got into some more sinister things like maybe the government's trying to make us do stuff just to control us, kind of thing. This is where that kind of went downhill from there, basically. But there actually is a very simple explanation for the changing recommendations about masks, okay? And, one of the things I said there that maybe public health people don't know what they're talking about, it had a tiny iota of truth, because basically, initially, we actually didn't know what this coronavirus was going to be like, because it never infected humans before. We didn't know exactly how it was going to act. We did have two good examples of bad coronaviruses in this country that we could look at. And some of you guys are saying, what bad coronaviruses do we have in this country? And so we did have two, actually in one way, much worse coronaviruses than this one. The SARS coronavirus, the first one, was in 2003, and that had about a 10% mortality. You had a 1 in 10 chance of dying if you got that coronavirus, much higher than this one. The second one, MERS, in 2013, had a 35% mortality. You had a greater than 1 in 3 chance of dying if you caught that virus. Now you're saying, what are you talking about? I never even heard of those. So why is that? Okay, well, there's two main reasons you may not have heard of those or remember those other coronaviruses. The first reason is the main reason, and it's that even though this coronavirus is a lot less deadly, it's way more contagious. A lot more people have caught this coronavirus than those other two. So that's the main reason that this one has wreaked much more havoc in the world and in this country. There is a second reason, though, and that is that we actually kept both of those coronaviruses out of this country much better than this one. And I know some of you guys are thinking, well, that's because of the Trump administration, and others of you are going to saying, well, it had nothing to do with the Trump administration. And to be honest, actually there's factors with both. It was partly the administration's fault, and then there were other factors. Story for another video. If people want to hear it, post, and maybe I'll come up with a video for that. Basically, those are the two reasons you didn't hear about those, but certainly public health people had heard about them. So when this coronavirus reared its ugly head, we basically looked back at those two coronaviruses. Now I'm going to diverge slightly and talk about the droplets. Now you guys have heard about the droplets. There's the big droplets and the middle-sized droplets and the little tiny baby droplets. The big ones are the ones that kind of come out, go a few feet, and then basically fall to the ground. They're in the air very little time. The biggest ones are the ones, you guys all know about those. Those are the ones that make you back up when somebody's vigorously talking in front of you, kind of like I am now. Those are the big ones. Now, those are actually the biggest ones, but there's a bunch of big ones. The smallest ones are the ones that come out and gravity doesn't have as much of an effect on them. They float in the air for hours. They lurk in dark corners and lunge out at you when you walk by. When this coronavirus showed up, people looked at those previous two coronaviruses. One thing about those two is that, to be honest, those coronaviruses pretty much just rode on the big droplets. They would come out, drop to the floor, and that would be it, right? I mean, to really catch one of those coronaviruses, you really basically had to be in a room with somebody coughing. Well, I guess you could get it if you came back later and licked the floor. Hopefully nobody got it that way. You basically had to be in the room with somebody coughing to get those two coronaviruses. As time went by, it became clearer and clearer that you actually didn't have to be in a room with somebody coughing to catch this coronavirus. In fact, you didn't even have to know somebody who had it. And then they actually demonstrated in the lab that actually the coronavirus actually does ride on those tiny, tiny little droplets and remains alive on those tiny, tiny little droplets. And that was the point where public health people said, well, yeah, you really should be wearing a mask when you go out in public, because you don't know if you're going to pass by somebody who has it, or you're going to be in a room where somebody's put it into the air, and it stays around the air for quite a while. So that's how that change happened. The double masking is another thing, but basically that has to do with the mutations. You've all heard of the mutations. We have several mutations now that are more infectious even than the original one. The double masking recommendation just comes because with something more contagious, obviously if you have more layers, that's going to really probably help, right? So kind of a simple explanation for changing recommendations. And I mean, you can come up with a sinister explanation if you want, but you'd be just coming up with a sinister explanation for something that has a simple explanation. Not sure if that's a smart thing to do. So the real question, though, is do the masks actually work for those tiny little droplets? Because that's a big question, and that's a question for the next video. So I want to just thank everybody for watching. If you want to find out about that, watch the next one. Also, if people have other questions that I'm not going to be covering in these, make sure you post them, because maybe we can come up with a video for those. But thanks for watching. See you next time, hopefully. Bye.